Hi everyone, this is Mr. Cardoso. Thanks for joining this lesson. In this lesson I will be going over the introduction to objects. So we're going to be talking a little bit about 6.1 if you're in my class, ICS4U, and that's the section that will correspond in the textbook. So let's get right to it. So the example that they use, I'm going to try and follow that same example here, is a fraction. So we're going to create a fraction object. So this class defines the fraction object as a ratio of integers. As in mathematics, fractions can be added, subtracted, multiplied, divided. There can be other operations. So we're going to start really simple here by making a fraction. And before we do that, let me just go down into the interactions panel down here and just show you, we have some data types, right? So we have like int x can store numbers, a double y can store double values, and so on, right? But what if we wanted to create our own type? And that's what objects are all about. Objects are about being able to create your own sort of data type so that you can group important information together. So when you're writing object code, we like to think that you are actually creating a tool for other programmers, or maybe yourself. You're going to use this tool to create another program for the end user. So let's get right to it. Let's create a fraction class. So I'm going to start by typing class fraction, which is the name of the type or object that I want to create. And I open and close that class. Now in here, what I'm going to include is what does a fraction, what is it made of? So I'm going to define a fraction by having a numerator and a denominator, and as I set up here, they're both going to be integers. So I'm going to say int num and int den. Now this might look a little weird because there's no public static void main in this situation, and so there's no main method that we're used to writing. We're just writing our class, and we're writing these two items, and these things are called fields, and they define what the object is made of. So these are the kind of like, I like to think of them as the nouns, if you will. Right? Not what the object can do, those would be the verbs, but this is what the object is, what defines an object. So for example, if we were making a car object, maybe it would be engine size, number of doors, the car color, that kind of thing. What defines a car? Here we're talking about a fraction. So that's pretty much it, actually. We've created our fraction class right now. So if I hit the compile button, I've already saved this. So if I hit the compile button here, you can see it compiles. Now, using this fraction class. Now I can go ahead and use this in the interactions panel here of Dr. Java, but I've actually set up another class here called, I'm just going to delete that public, that fraction calculator, right? So just to give you an idea of how this fraction class, because if I were to take this fraction class here and try to run it, well, I can't run it. There's no main method. If there's no main method in a Java class, then you cannot run that class. So this class cannot run on its own, but it can run within another, or you can use it within another class. So I'm going to go to fraction calculator here. And just like before when we were creating those ints and so on, we have our fraction calculator. So this is where a secondary programmer they might write this program using the fraction class. For example, they might be making a calculator, so that's why I use this as an example. They can do operations with fractions and so on. So, how to first create a fraction in our main method, for example, is we start by, just like we would, for example, if I wanted to go int x, right? Same idea here, I can go fraction, let's say f. Right? And that will compile as long as you're in the same folder, and of course you spell fraction correctly. So now that will work. Now these are just Don't mind these. These are warnings, so that's just saying both of them haven't been used. So they're just warnings and not actual errors. Whereas before I had, so for example, I can't just go like car C. So if I go car C, it's going to be like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what car is, cannot be resolved to a type. So fraction it now understands as a type because we've created it up here. And we said each fraction has a numerator and a denominator, both of type integers. For other types of objects, these don't have to be the same, and you can have more than two, but we'll get to that later. So now, just like this x here, we haven't given it a value. So to give it a value, you might have to go like int x equals 3. In the same way, for the fraction, you'd have to go fraction f equals new fraction, open close brackets. Okay, so we're going to understand this a little bit more later on, but this is how we have to create objects. Anytime something's an object. Now, things like int, double, what else you used to car, all of these things are what we call primitives, primitive data types. So these are primitive data types. Notice that they're all lowercase letters to start them off. The fraction is not a primitive. It's not a basic data type. It's an object. So it means it's a little bit more complicated. So I can't just go, for example, x equals 3 like I've done here. I actually have to use the new keyword. And what this does is it constructs or creates a fraction. And it says f is now pointing to this construction of our new fraction. Okay, so now that fraction, if I were to try to do anything with it, for example, system.out.println, I know I can print out x, for example. What happens when I try to print out f? So let's compile this. Now this program I can run, of course, because there's a main method. So I can hit the run button. And so it prints out 3 for x because we've assigned 3 to x here. But the fraction f, it's just giving me this kind of code here. Now this code is just saying, okay, this is of type fraction. And this is kind of giving like a unique identifier of the fraction class. So if I were to make another one, because I can make as many of these as I want, just like I can make as many integers as I want. So if I want to call that, let's call this one f1. Let's call this f2. Okay, so now I can put f1 in here, copy and paste this. Sorry, f1, f2, compile, and run. And now you can see we've got 2 fraction objects. You can see we've got a unique identifier for each one saying, which indicates basically they're not the same fraction. Now, that's obviously all well and good, but how do we use this fraction now? This is not very good. Okay, so if we were actually making a real program, let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. We might say, let's ask the user to enter the values for our fractions. So we could do that something like system.println. Actually, let's not do it that way. We'll do it that way in a later video. What we're going to do here is we're just going to assign the value. So we've created these 2 fractions. So how to actually get to these values or the fields that we've defined here. So we can go, for example, f1 dot and then the field name, so num. Let's say we wanted to create the fraction 1 over 2. So that's 1. Because we can only assign, I can't put 1 over 2 here because Java doesn't understand what that means. Right? So just 1 for the numerator. Now to assign the denominator, I can go f1 dot then gets 2. Right? So now that creates f1. So think of this like f1, think of it like possession. F1's numerator, think of the dot like that possession. Right? is equal to 1, and this one is saying f1's denominator is equal to 2. Okay, so in the same way, we can do the same thing for f2 dot new equals, let's say we wanted to make it 3/4. f2 dot then equals 4. So now both of these pieces of information are grouped together within f1. Both of these two pieces of information are grouped together in f2. So that's where it's a little bit more useful, and we're going to get more and more useful as we go along here. So now if we wanted to print it, again, what happens if we go my fraction is, and we went f1. So we compile here, hit the run button, but we still get this code, right, of our unique identifier. So if we actually wanted to print it out, we might want to do something like using what we know about string concatenation, f1.num plus f1.then. So compile that, hit the run button. All right, now we get it. So now we can do this again. We can change this to f2.num and f2.then, and we get that. So what we've done here is we've created a type called fraction. Now, the most important thing that I want you to understand in this lesson is that objects, what we've done here in the fraction class is we've created like a cookie cutter. So this cookie cutter, which we're going to make better and better each time, because right now this fraction can't do very much. But we've created a cookie cutter, and in the fraction class, we've created 2 cookies from that cookie cutter, f1 and f2. And in fact, we can make as many cookies as we want from that cookie cutter. And all of them will have their own version of a numerator and a denominator. They'll have their own fields that you can modify. So we've essentially created a type. Now in the next few videos, what we'll do is we'll go forward in making this fraction class, or our cookie cutter, even better, so that we can add fractions automatically, multiply fractions, reduce fractions, do other things that fractions can do, so that we don't have to create that code in here, so that every fraction will be able to do these kinds of functionality on their own, such as even printing itself out. So the key point here to understand is that we've essentially created a class which is a type of type fraction. This is what defines the fraction, which are called fields. This is just what another programmer might use with the main method, that we can actually create some fractions in, modify their fields, print them out, and use them in an actual program. For example, I might make this program a little bit better. Eventually, I might ask the user, please enter, the numerator and the denominator of a first fraction, and please enter a numerator and denominator of a second fraction, and then we can add, subtract, multiply, and divide those fractions, and then print out the results. And we'll do that all with the help of this other class as we eventually get there. Okay, so next class we will talk about how to make this fraction class a lot more useful. See you then. Thanks. Bye.